Okay, well, look, when you talk about these so-called grooming gangs in the United Kingdom, let's be clear, first of all. What you're talking about are British men abusing British girls in Britain. We're literally not talking about any sort of a phenomenon taking place in the Muslim world. So this very clearly has to do with your culture, not ours. It has to do with your society, not ours. It has to do with your values, not ours. You corrupt your own people, and you promote degeneracy, and you promote predation among your own people, and that's a fact. This obviously has nothing to do with our culture. To say that it has anything to do with Muslim culture it makes as much sense as saying that fish and chips is a part of Islamic culture because Muslims in the UK eat fish and chips. No. In fact, in most of our countries, the only people that you'll find doing these kinds of things are Western tourists. And of course, we all know that this is what you all used to do writ large in our lands when you were colonizing our land. So this is a Western problem. And then the apparent cover-up that they're talking about, all because they said that they were afraid that if they pursued these cases, that they'd then be accused of racism or they'd be accused of Islamophobia or what have you. Again, this is a Western problem because you don't take justice seriously. In your countries, justice takes a backseat to politics, and your politics are completely crippled by a lack of any sort of moral clarity or any sort of integrity. And I mean, let's be honest, your society will always err on the side of sexual depravity. You and I both know that your politicians have no incentive whatsoever to shine a spotlight on sexual predation because most of them are perpetrators themselves. And your own history of extreme racism, which is inarguable, your culture of bigotry, collides now with your desire to look like you're not racist and like you're not bigots. So you're in a bit of a quandary in dealing with criminal cases involving non-whites. Since your whole criminal justice system, so-called, has always been little more than an ethnic cleansing program. So you're in a conflict because you are not in reality what you want people to believe you are. So you always fumble, when you're trying to do what people would do who actually are what you pretend to be. You see what I mean? Because it's not your nature. It's not natural to you. So because you're not genuinely fair, you're not genuinely objective, you're not genuinely unbiased and just, your impersonation of fairness, your impersonation of objectivity, your impersonation of justice is always conspicuously flawed. It's like a child who's trying to look like a grown-up and he's struggling to know how to tie a necktie. Or he's tying knots in his shoelaces because he just knows that shoelaces are supposed to be tied, but he never actually learned how to do it. This is you. That's the West. Especially when you're talking about matters of justice or human rights or what have you. When Britain talks about grooming gangs, it reminds me of that old story of a pirate who got arrested, and he was brought before the king, and he said to the king, there's no difference really between you and me, except that I only have one ship, and so you get to call me a pirate, whereas you have a navy, so you're an empire. But actually we operate the same, because Western so-called civilization is actually nothing but one big gigantic grooming gang. The whole culture, the whole system, the systemic grooming and sexualization of young women in that culture is a fixture of the culture. It's a structural feature of Western culture. It's evolved over centuries. It's deeply intertwined in their whole economic and social system. Starting from their deeply misogynistic past until today, Western culture has very long normalized the hypersexualization of young women and treating them as less than human beings with inherent dignity. It treats them as objects for consumption. Studies show that by the age of 8, girls in the West are already internalizing societal messages about their appearance, about how their appearance is their primary source of value in that society. According to a 2021 report by the American Psychological Association, the sexualization of girls in the media, from music videos to advertising, has profound negative psychological effects on those girls, leading to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, on and on and on. Now, would that be the case if the messaging in your media was that they were receiving was a positive message? No, this culture of grooming is not accidental. It's perpetuated through systemic forces that prioritize profit over morality. From industries like fashion to industries like pornography that actively target younger demographics, normalizing imagery that blurs the line between childhood and adulthood. This is normal for you. For instance, the rise of platforms like OnlyFans, which saw a 70% increase in user signups during the COVID-19 pandemic. It reflects how economic desperation and culturalization push young women, some barely out of high school, into commodifying their own bodies just for survival. In other words, just like a pimp, you engineer the vulnerable into capitulating with their own exploitation. Culturally, you engineer that. You create a society, you create an economic system that punishes everyone, and then you offer a reward to young women if they capitulate with self-degradation. Because you've already groomed them from childhood to accept that their bodies and their beauty and their sexual attractiveness and their sexual utility to men are their greatest assets in the commercial market. This is what you teach them. So then you close off all other financial opportunities, economic opportunities, and then you open the avenues for sexual exploitation, and they'll go along with it. So how is that not grooming on a mass scale, writ large? The West's historical tolerance for adult relationships with underage girls is undeniable, and it's a cultural pathology of the West. As recently as the 20th century, legal ages for marriage in most Western countries were shockingly low. In the United States, it was legal in several states for girls as young as 12 to marry with parental consent. Even today, child marriage remains technically legal in several U.S. states. This permissiveness is not confined to the past by any stretch of the imagination. Jeffrey Epstein, he had a sprawling network of abuse and exploitation that was all enabled by some of the most powerful individuals in Western society. Why, it's a chilling testament to how normalized and how institutionalized sexual predation is in your societies. The fact that Epstein was able to operate with impunity for decades, well, it speaks volumes about the complicity of your cultural and your legal systems and your institutions. I mean, economic conditions in the West exacerbate this exploitation. You can't deny it. With the cost of living skyrocketing and social safety nets eroding across the West, many young women find themselves turning to sex work, so-called, not out of choice, but out of necessity. You know, according to the what's called the Polaris Project, the U.S. has one of the highest rates in the world for sex trafficking, with an estimated 200,000 incidents occurring annually, every year. These victims are overwhelmingly young, overwhelmingly girls, often lured into exploitation by promises of financial stability or for opportunities for a better life. That's grooming. And then, like I said, you've got the platforms like OnlyFans. That just further illustrates the point. It's marketed as empowering for women. These platforms are, in reality, digital brothels where economic desperation and societal and cultural grooming converge. You know, a 2022 study found that 50% of content creators on OnlyFans joined due to financial hardship, with many reporting feelings of regret and exploitation, despite the promise of financial autonomy. That's grooming. You groomed them for that. Pornography is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that plays a central role in the normalization of sexual exploitation in the West. You know, the average age of first exposure to pornography in the West is now just 11 years old. This early exposure skews young people's perception of healthy relationships, and it perpetuates harmful stereotypes about consent and about power dynamics in intimacy. A 2019 study by the UK's Children's Commissioner found that nearly half of all boys between the ages of 11 and 16 who consume pornography actually did believe that it was a realistic representation of sexual relationships. Now, those young boys, those are your boys. Those are your boys in the UK. They're going to be approaching young girls with that mentality. Well, that's grooming. You're grooming the boys and you're grooming the boys to groom the girls. That's your whole culture. Pornography increasingly caters to themes that fetishize youth and power imbalances. You know, you've got categories like teens and stepdaughters. These dominate platforms like that. That just reinforces the grooming culture by normalizing the sexualization of minors. And incest. The impact of this consumption is profound on your young people. It influences their individual behavior and it influences societal norms. This is all reflective of the fundamentally amoral and immoral society of your culture, of your so-called civilization. Your whole society is a society of grooming and predation. That's your whole system. You know, prostitution, which you euphemize as sex work in the West, is another manifestation of this. Well, it's marketed by feminists and liberals as some form of empowerment, the reality is far more grim. According to a 2018 study by the International Labor Organization, over 70% of women who are in prostitution in Western countries report that they have histories of sexual abuse, of poverty, and of coercion. These are not empowered choices. These are survival strategies born out of a systemic failure. It's a system of grooming. Like I said, you've got human trafficking, and that fuels that industry. The Global Slavery Index estimates that 403,000 people are living in modern-day slavery in the United States alone. Many of them have been trafficked for sexual exploitation. The commodification of women's bodies is not just a cultural issue, it's a cornerstone of an exploitative economic system and of a culture that has never valued women as full human beings, but only as objects for men to use at will. Western media, obviously, popular entertainment, all of those industries play a pivotal role in sustaining this type of sick culture. Films, music, and advertising, the advertising industry, marketing, and so forth, they glamorize youth and sexual availability while ridiculing modesty and ridiculing chastity. Pop stars are routinely marketed as sex symbols from a very young age, setting a standard for young women to try to emulate. The 2020 Netflix controversy surrounding that film, Cuties, is a stark example of how the line between art and exploitation is deliberately blurred. I mean, I don't know if there's even one single young female celebrity who came through the Mickey Mouse Club who isn't mental today. I'm telling you, the Western culture of grooming and of exploitation is not just some sort of a social ill. This is a system of oppression that targets the most vulnerable among the population. It targets the most vulnerable. It's a system that conflates liberation with commodification. It disguises exploitation as empowerment. And it normalizes the sexualization of youth under the guise of so-called progressive values. Well, right now, you've got over 100,000 prostitutes in the UK, in your country where you're so mad about grooming. Around half of those prostitutes are in London alone. Well, who do you think groomed them? Because according to studies, at least 80% of them got into prostitution through grooming and through coercion of some kind or another. The number of women who are going into prostitution in the UK has skyrocketed since the economic crisis and since inflation took off. Tell me that's not systemic grooming. Culturally and economically, you groom your people for this. I mean, the profound hypocrisy that runs through deep through the veins of Western society is stunning. It's a breathtaking level of dishonesty, this performative outrage over so-called grooming gangs, Pakistani grooming gangs, while the overwhelming majority of these types of crimes are committed by white Britons. That's a fact. 85% of grooming cases, grooming gang offenses, are carried out by white men. In fact, data from 2023 shows that 83% of child sexual abuse suspects were white, while only 2.7% were of Asian descent. Grooming is your culture, not ours. If anyone whose heritage is from the Muslim world, or from Asia, or what have you, if any of those types of people are involved in these very British, very Western activities, well, these are just the ones who have successfully assimilated to your culture, that's all. I mean, look at the numbers. In 2023, out of 1,884 child sexual abuse suspects, 1,623 were white. That's an overwhelming 85%. The data tells us that in the first 3 quarters of 2024, there were 144 white suspects compared to just 31 British Pakistani suspects in group-based child sexual exploitation cases. That's grooming gangs. 85% were white. So in reality, while you're clamoring on and on and on about a so-called cover-up of the British Pakistani grooming cases, in fact, you only want to talk about these cases as a way to cover up your own mass-scale criminality. You want to talk about them because you want to hide the fact that you do these things more than anyone. So you're using this talk of a cover-up precisely to cover up your own crimes, which is absolutely familiar to us. It's so familiar that it's predictable. That's how fundamentally unserious you are in your society about protecting women, how fundamentally unserious you are about protecting children. This is how deeply unserious you are about justice, and really how deeply committed you are as a culture, as a society, as a so-called civilization to never change, to never evolve, and to never civilize. Honestly, it's absolutely the case that whatever the West says, If you want to understand the world, then you have to take whatever they say and realize that the opposite is the reality. Truly. And every time they make an accusation, it's nothing but a confession. They speak in backward code, you know. It's not that they don't tell you what they're doing. It's just that instead of saying that they're doing it, they'll say that you're doing it. So that's how you can always know what they're doing, because they'll accuse you of doing the thing that they're doing. And anytime they say that things are a certain kind of way, well, you know that it's the opposite of whatever they said. Just read everything that they say backwards. Just read everything that they say backwards, and you will understand what's really being said. It's like those, remember when they used to get those, find those satanic messages that they would play backwards? When they would play a song backwards, they would find satanic messages in the lyrics. Well, that's every pronouncement that the West ever makes. Just play it backwards, and you'll hear the satanic message that they're really telling you. So when they say, for example, that they're outraged because Asian men are grooming and raping minors, what they're really saying is that white British men are grooming and raping minors, and that they're happy about it. Just like when they say that Muslims are terrorists, what they are really saying is that they are terrorizing Muslims. That's how it works. That's how you translate them. That's how you translate Western diatribes. Just run it backwards, which is completely consistent with their whole backwards culture. Your so-called civilization is a grooming civilization. It's an exploitative civilization, abusive, predatory, and sociopathic on the micro level and on the macro level. You ruin your own people, and you corrupt your own people, and you ruin and you corrupt any people who come to live with you. And you try to ruin and corrupt the people in the countries where you colonize. And it's a shame. You don't give your own people a chance. Wallahi, it's a shame. You don't give your own people a chance. You don't give your own people the tools. In fact, you actively deprive them of the tools to be decent, to be moral, to be principled, to be good. You actually indoctrinate your people, and you brainwash your people, and you groom your people into degeneracy and perversion and moral relativism. And you can't possibly hate a people more than that. You can't possibly hate people more than when you encourage them and you coerce them into destroying themselves, into destroying their own souls. Why, it's inhuman. And then you add insult to injury by gaslighting your whole society. I swear, it's like you're choking someone and calling it CPR. It's diabolical. And that's the only real reason why you're going on and on and on about this minuscule slice of your national criminality that's being committed by non-white British people. Because as long as you can fool Muslims into trying to so-called defend ourselves against your accusations, well, then you never have to defend yourselves and your indefensible behavior. But I'm telling you, this addiction to avoidance of accountability is not going to serve you well in the long term. It's not going to serve you well. Just as it doesn't work for individuals, it's not going to work for a nation. It doesn't work for nations, ultimately. I mean, maybe that's why you all talk about colonizing outer space, because you've completely ruined your reputation on this planet. Your whole society is a rape gang. I'm sorry to tell you. And the entire global south can testify to that. And you are the most prolific serial criminals in history. So spare me your conspicuously selective pretend moral outrage. These crimes are not only not connected in any way whatsoever to Islam or to Muslims, they are very Western crimes. And the truth is that in Islam, we know very well how to deal with people who commit these kinds of crimes. So if you want to extradite your criminals over to us, to our lands for punishment, well, we'll take care of it. We know how to take care of it. Just make sure that you send all of them. Send the whole lot of them. Don't just send the ones that you get mad about. Send us your white criminals too, and we'll take care of it. But of course, if you send us your white criminals, well, then I think London would be a ghost town.